Then I will pass the floor to Maria, who will talk about some practical approaches to joint strategies and UN communication groups. And then we will open the floor to a Q&A, which will be moderated by myself with resource people, with Maria and Wissam also providing comments. I am joined today in New York by a number of colleagues from our Communications and Advocacy Working Group, whom I just wanted to mention briefly. Madeline Eisner from UNICEF, as well as Janos Tiszowski from DPI. So welcome to you and welcome to the others gathered in the room today. Let me sort of dive in. Oops. There we go. Okay, so as you know, there are 5 pillars of the standard operating procedures: one program, one budget, one leader, operating as one, and communicating as one. This is the larger ecosystem in which the communicating as one pillar sits. And each one, as you can see from the slide, has a number of core elements. Within communicating as one, there are 2, which is focuses on do you have a joint communication strategy, and do you have a UN communications group at the country level? Now, we collected, moving in to talk about the data that we've collected on progress towards these 2 elements, we have looked at the 2 elements are, can be described in the following way. A joint communication strategy appropriate to the country context, approved by the UNCTS and monitored and reported against in the UN country results report. If a country team has this in place, the core element is marked as fully implemented. In terms of, it is also marked as partially implemented if they have developed but not yet fully endorsed a strategy, or it is approved but not yet fully being implemented. In terms of the country level communications group, it is headed by a head of agency, and it brings together the focal points from UN agencies at the country level. It is marked as fully implemented if the UNCG is has been established with a clear TOR. It meets and chaired by an agency head. It is marked as partially implemented if the country communications group is established with a clear TOR, but does not meet regularly or is not chaired by an agency head. So this is just a brief introduction into how these 2 elements, these 2 core elements, are measured within, from the perspective of the information management system. And what I would point your attention to is some of the data that we've collected, which shows how country teams stand with regard to joint strategies and communication groups. So if you looked at the data, you see that about 41% of UN country teams have a joint communications group at country level. But if you break down that number into fully and partially achieved, you see that about 13% of UN country teams have achieved the joint communications group fully, and partially is about 28, a little bit over 28%. In terms of the joint communication strategy, about 25% of UN country teams have a joint communication strategy fully implemented, and about 46, a little bit over 46% have achieved one partially. So we have also looked through the UNDG information management system at a number of other elements on communications. So, for example, the percent of countries with a common Twitter account, a Facebook page, common website, and you see the numbers in front of you on that slide, so I won't go into them in detail. But it also does show that there can be that there is a need for greater guiding principles on common messaging, as well as a need for wider use of joint advocacy strategies to communicate on human rights or other normative issues. And then we have, just very briefly, we have also looked at the regional breakdown for how different regions compare in terms of how they, whether they have achieved having a joint communications group, a joint communication strategy, and as well as other elements of communication, which I'm showing you here on the screen. The take-up of Twitter, Facebook, UNCTS websites. And in conclusion, I just wanted to mention that this data comes from the UNDG information management system. It has been collected for the first time. And it's based on a self-assessment of UN country teams. And this data will be updated regularly, at least once a year. So I wanted to just now pass the floor to Maria, who will talk about practical approaches that UN country teams can take toward establishing UN communication groups, moving ahead with joint communication strategies. So on that note, let me pass the floor to Maria, and then we will open the floor to your questions.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone from Spain. As mentioned by Peter at the beginning of the webinar and just now, we'll now have a quick look at the two core elements of the Communicating as One guidelines. These are the UN Communications Group and the Joint Communication Strategy. Why are they important? Bottlenecks. And despite the challenges, practical elements on why we need to have them. The first part of my presentation will address some of these issues that you might be already facing when establishing a UNCG. So let's start with the why. Why do we need a UNCG? Peter?
Yes.
Can you
yes. Yes. We're there.
Can you pass the slide?
To the next slide.
Another one. Yeah, the next one. Thank you.
Sorry.
So here are some of the reasons that most of you are already related to. Why do we need a UNCG? Again, to enhance individual efforts by pooling communications, resources, and expertise, to coordinate communication and media campaigns, and to ensure that agency communications are complementary and non-competitive. But what does all this mean from a practical point of view? Next slide, thanks. Sometimes we face challenges when trying to establish a UNCG. Challenges can be lack of human resources, the staff is overburdened, and communication is not a top priority for the UNCT. But having a UNCG has a practical side that we should explore and we should share when lobbying for their establishment at country level. So let's start with one aspect, one practical side of having a UNCG. Next slide, Peter, please. Thanks. Coordination. A UNCG can support coordination in several ways. A UNCG can support governments in coordinating their communication efforts, for example. Think about the 16 days of activism. Some of you might have experienced that each ministry wants to highlight its work in the gender-based violence area. So eventually, each agency has to organize an event with the Ministry of Interior, an event with the Ministry of Women Affairs, etc. Why not reaching the government with a proposal of one event to bring all ministries and all agencies together? This would be just one example. Another example of coordination, another practical side of it, is bringing together program communication initiatives. Let's think about a campaign to end child marriage in Pakistan, for instance. UNFPA might be working in 2 provinces, whereas WHO might be working in 2 other different provinces. Both can be planning communication campaigns or communication products, for instance. Why not complement both efforts? So coordination is one of the practical sides of UNCG. Next slide, Peter. Thanks. Another advantage of having a UNCG and common communication tools is making small agencies, funds, and programs visible. What does this mean? For instance, in Suriname, UNFPA, just to put an example, didn't have the capacity to have its own website. When the UNCT establishes one UN site, the organization was able for the first time to share news and its program in a comprehensive manner. Next slide. And last but not least, a UNCG can give an umbrella to similar communication initiatives. For instance, WHO and UNFPA might be working in midwifery, together or not, but they both have several communication activities in their work plans. Instead of working in silos, they can contact UNICEF, for example, or other relevant partners in the country to think about an umbrella campaign to bring all the messaging and actions together and increase the impact of the activities. We did this in Afghanistan. I used to work there for the last 2 years with the State of Afghanistan Midwifery Report. Initially, it was a UNFPA activity, but eventually it became a campaign involving the Ministry of Public Health, of course, and more than 10 different organizations, including research institutions, NGOs, universities, ministries, and even donors. So this wouldn't have happened without a UNCG. And next slide, please, Peter. Thanks. And I would like to end this first part of this presentation reflecting on how can a UNCG be sustainable. The key to maintain an active UNCG, it might be to make it valuable for all members. And we have shared some examples here on when a UNCG can be relevant and useful. And it's not just about the members of the UNCG. Other coordinating mechanisms, the organization has to understand and see the value of this group too. And I'm sure some of the participants today can bring other examples, and we would love to hear them in the Q&A session that Peter mentioned before. Next slide, Peter. Thanks. So the second chapter of my presentation is about challenges and bottlenecks when developing a comms strategy. We will look at the reasons of why it's important to have one and what challenges you might face when drafting it. Also, we will propose some solutions to potential bottlenecks. Next slide. Again, let's start with the why. This will be a question that some of you may be facing or might have faced for sure already. Why it is important? Next. Let's look at two essential aspects of why having a strategy is important. We need to mobilize resource support for the new development agenda. And as you all might know, the new development agenda demands cross-cutting approaches to communications. So a strategy can definitely be supportive of that. And a second essential aspect is that we need a strong and coherent image of the UN to show the relevance of the organization as a key development partner. You may be thinking that there are many other reasons why to have a comms strategy, and yes, some of those reasons are in the guidelines that were mentioned by Peter before. So there are many arguments that we can use to advocate for a strategy. These are just two essential ones. Next. So we all know it's important. This is a fact. Having a strategy is super important. The theory is there. The guidelines are there. But still you will be asked, or at least I have been asked, do we really need it, Maria? So next slide. And the answer is simple. The answer is yes. We need a strategy. Next. Okay, so we need a strategy. And then you might find the other challenges. The first one might be that communication is not a top priority for the UNCT. And the second might be that UNCT members don't have enough human resources to make communicating as well a priority. This is very common. Judges might not have the required financial resources to either draft it or put it or implement it. Another challenge might be that UNCG members don't have a comms background, so they might not feel 100% comfortable developing a communications strategy. Or also, UNCG members are already overburdened with agency-related work. This is really common, at least from my experience. But you will hear other bads. We can hear something, I mean, can hear questions like, we already celebrate together the UN Day. What else do we need to do, really? So these are common issues that I'm sure some of you have heard when proposing the development of a joint strategy. So what are the arguments that we can use when we face these challenges? Next. Thanks. So, I mean, I'm sure you have more than the ones that I have highlighted in this slide, but I just wanted to make it short and straightforward. And basically, having a strategy, it saves funds first, and when agencies work together, each person's workload is reduced. The impact of communication campaigns increases. Think about social media, for instance. 36 platforms tweeting and sharing the same message have more impact than one. That's just one basic example. And then it can reduce procurement processes. Who doesn't want to reduce procurement processes? So these are some advantages of having a comms strategy that we have to think of when sort of trying to gain some support to draft it. Next, Peter. Next slide. Thank you. No, before go back. Thanks. So moving on. In this last part of my presentation, I would like to share other challenges that you might find, or that you might find, or you have already found, because I know some of the participants already have a communication strategy. So these are some issues that you might find in the near future when drafting and writing the strategy. To develop the UN strategy, of course, we propose to follow the guidelines developed by DOCO. And these guidelines propose several steps, and in some of them, you might find some challenges. We have chosen some of the most common ones, and we have tried to find solutions that might help you. And next slide, Peter. The first issue that we would like to address is the content. So this will be the context, sorry. So this will be the first step towards developing a strategy. The first step is writing an analysis of the context where this strategy is going to be implemented. So what does this mean? This means understanding what the UN does and stands for in the country, what is the image or the perception of the UN among general public and also development partners, and what communication challenges might be available. But so when drafting the context, and this on my own experience as well, the first challenge might be that we don't have the capacity to develop a perception analysis. We don't have the funds, we don't have the human resources. So what are the potential solutions that we can find to this? The first solution might be to hire a consultant to do a rapid assessment about among key development partners and government. Peter, can you click? Thank you. The second one could be to incorporate one or two questions in any relevant baseline surveys that are being developed or that are planning to be developed by agencies. And the third one, another solution might be to contact a key institution in the country to provide a briefing, for instance, to the UNCTS on the key communication aspects that might be relevant for the UN in that country. So another common challenge when writing a strategy is writing or agreeing on the objectives of the strategy. We wouldn't recommend more than 5 objectives, but of course that depends on the strategy and on the UNDAF. So let's start from there. How do we go about writing the communication strategies? We would recommend to focus on the UNDAF pillars or UNDAF results, depending on how you name them, and to think about the communication angle of the different program outputs. So that will be like one of the first issues to take into consideration. Then another one will be the institutional communication objectives. Think about them. Do we need a common branding, a specific tagline, a website, social media? You might want to include all these, like having, for instance, a virtual presence of the UN. No? These are things that you might be willing to incorporate. Institutional communication objectives. And last but not least, include an internal communication component. For instance, to transform all UN staff in UN ambassadors. So institutional, program, and internal comms objectives. This is like just an example of how to go about writing the comms objectives. Next. And the last part of the presentation is about common messaging, which is a very challenging area when developing the strategy. Disagreements on whether focus on messages around the UN or around the key areas of work of the agencies are super common. Many times we found that we have too many messages because every agency expertise is of course important, but this is very common when you start thinking about messaging from an agency perspective, which is completely understandable, of course. But a joint communication strategy, of course, is about a joint framework. The joint framework, of course, it's the UNDAF. So we have to look at the UNDAF in the same way each agency will look at their CPAP or their country program when drafting the key messages. So when picking up the issues for messaging, start with the UNDAF. That will be like sort of first way to approach it. Which are the areas of the UNDAF? Which are the programmatic areas? And don't worry about the number of messages. It is good to have a message prepared for different areas. That doesn't mean that we will use all of them or that we will use them every day. But if we need it, if we need a specific message, for instance, in landmines, we will have it. We'll have it ready, and what is more important, it will have been approved by the UNCTS. So it has, I mean, it has a very practical side. And as well as we saw in the objectives, craft some institutional messages as well. Look at the vision of the organization in the UNDAF. This can definitely help. And also, there are many experiences of other countries. And most of them, if not like 100% of them, have institutional messages included in their strategy. So go and have a look at other countries' examples and to get some ideas or to understand a little bit more how to craft these institutional messages. So with this slide, I end my presentation here, Peter, and I think yeah, we will move to the Q&A session to hear questions, experiences, solutions, more challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. This has really been a very comprehensive and very interesting and useful presentation. I also just wanted to mention a couple of things which I should have actually mentioned earlier, that Maria's presentation really benefits from her experience having worked in Afghanistan as well as Suriname. So I just wanted to mention the context in which she brings her advice and her comments. I also wanted to mention that we're joined by Gina Lucarelli of the Knowledge and Innovation team here at DOCO, and I think now would be a good time to open up to questions. Let me just peer into the question box. That would be.
So our first question is from Yanira, who's working in Guinea-Bissau. And she's got a specific question on, they have a UN communications group. She says our UN communications group does exist, but it would be useful to have specific terms of reference / recommendations to strengthen coordination both inside and outside our communication group. So she says it's been difficult to elaborate a draft terms of reference for the group that suits the needs of the UN country team and the head of section at the peace building mission. So this might be a good question for Maria, having just come from Afghanistan. And then I can add a little bit on the end just on the terms of reference part.
Okay, great. Maria, do you want to jump in and take this question a little bit further?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Gina. We also had a mission in UNAMA in Afghanistan, so I hope my experience can be of a little help here. When writing our TOR in Afghanistan, the whole process of drafting the final UNCTS TOR and also the strategy, it was we did it in a comprehensive manner. We had a retreat for one day, not too fancy or complex, but we involved all the comms team, and it was the comms team involved 36 agencies in the case of Afghanistan, and we also invited the key people from the coordinating groups, the working groups, the UNDAF results groups. I don't know how we call them. So together, in a way, we thought through the strategy, all the different steps, and also the TOR of the communications group. My experience is that it's not easy sometimes to combine like the mission side of the UNCTS and the agency side of the UNCTS, but there are definitely ways of supporting each other. In our case, for instance, we went beyond the UN Day. For instance, we have organized, of course, the UN Day 2 years in a row, and we complement agencies, complement the UNAMA mission sort of activities, and the UNAMA mission complemented some activities with the UN activities. So the collaboration was very good, and it was good because we had a UNCG, and it was operative, and it was active. My advice for the terms of reference will be to look what in which areas you are already working together, and start from there. Let's not make it too complex. You have some guidelines in the guidelines, or you have some notes in the guidelines that Peter presented today, and I'm sure you are aware of. But make it simple at the beginning, and then of course it can be revised. And you will be, I mean, it's always a living document, because you will learn new things like as you start other new activities and new initiatives. So let's start from like the basic stuff, of course, to coordinate each other. Start with, of course, the UN Day, no, it's a fact. The 16 days of activism is another moment where you can work together with a mission. Same thing with other key days like Human Rights Day. I don't know, but sometimes I think my experience, we tend to like think that it's too complicated, and if we keep it simple, it might be easier to at least start with the first steps.
Thank you, Maria. And Gina's going to jump in. I know we also have Wissam online as well, but let me just pass the floor to Gina for a moment.
Just to say on these documents like communication strategies, terms of reference of the communications group, most RC offices now have access to the UNDG information management system that we've been building. So if you're interested in what's in there, you go to the IMS, you go to the report section, and then click on File Downloader. From there, you can actually search, you can target your search. So if you're looking for only terms of references for communications groups in settings where there is a peacekeeping or political mission, you can find those. I just pulled it up now, and there were quite a few there, but not too many that it's overwhelming. So you can have a look and start with something on paper. Just to say, this is a huge resource, and it took a lot of work from all the offices around the world to get the information there, and it's now available for you for just this kind of inspiration. It doesn't solve everything, but at least it's a start.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gina. Let's just move on to the next question.
Peter?
Yes, Wissam.
Please, I just want to add a few things on this question of terms of references.
Please.
There's something that we need to keep in mind. That is, the UNCG role is not only to write down the strategy. It is one part of its job. The UNCG role is also to provide guidance to the UNCT and the mission. That means that in, for example, crisis management, it's the UNCG role to come in and to say, look, UNCT, this is the message we would advise you to give. So I would join back Maria in saying, keep it simple. Think about the objectives about the UNCG. What is the objectives? Keeping in mind that writing the strategy is only one objective of the UNCG. It can have lots of other objectives, like producing documents, joint documents, writing down joint press releases, and contributing to the joint website. So I think the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what is the objective of the UNCG? And then from that question and the answer you're going to give yourself, write your terms of references. Go and get inspiration from other terms of references that are already on the UNGG website. I can't go back, but I've seen the one of, I think, Ghana, and everything is in there. Who's chairing? What's the role of everybody? Who can be member? Who is playing the role of the secretariat? And for example, you will see that there's no one model, as I've been saying lots of times before. For the secretariat role, for example, it can be played by the RCO communication specialist or by the UNIC if there's a United Nations Information Center in that country. For the chairperson also, you can see that chairperson can be on a rotational basis, or it can be on an election basis. So I would suggest to our colleague from Guinea-Bissau to have a look on other terms of preferences, and I can maybe send them some. And I'm sure that the first thing that they would need to do is think about the objectives they want to achieve together.
Thank you, Wissam. Let me move on to the next question. Just to, you know,
Yeah, got it.
I can look at
Just trying to decide which one.
Nice.
Okay, there's a hard question that I don't think we have an answer to, so let's put it out there. So this is from the UN Communications Information and Advocacy Group in Guyana. I guess you guys have a few people around the table there, so welcome. You've got a tough question, and honestly, I don't think there's an answer, so I'm going to look at my agency colleagues who are here in the room with us from UNICEF and DPI and hope they have some advice. They say our communications group has technical staff who have the added function of participating in the communications group. Is there any policy guidance for agencies to include communications functions for technical staff in their annual performance evaluation? It's a tough one, right?
No, it's an important one. This actually came up in, this is Madeline Eisner from UNICEF. This is an issue that came up also in, this is an issue that also came up in a training in March in Nairobi, which was an overall worldwide training on communicating as one. The fact that people don't get, that a lot of some of our agencies have people who are, or staff who are much more active in the UNCTS, and they feel that they're not getting the proper sort of rewards and value. I think this is an issue that we really have to take up in a more robust fashion in our own working group, because sometimes you lose sight of some of those details, I think, that are incredibly important. And that would be my suggestion, because there is a group within the UNCG which does look at all those HR factors, and it obviously is an issue that's come up many times.
If I may, Janos Szyszowski from DPI. As regards the staff at UN information centers, in the evaluations, in their annual evaluations, in their goals, in their so-called e-performance, we actually ask them, request them to include one goal that relates to the work of UNCGs. So each and every one of our directors that are DPI staff members are asked to include amongst the 5-6 goals that they have in their annual e-passes a goal that specifically relates to their function in the UNCG. Well, Madeline, absolutely, of course. I mean, you know, just to continue, yes, of course. I mean, our core mandate as an agency, if you wish, I mean, we're not an agency, of course, but if you would look at it that way, is of course communication. So naturally, it's more highlighted. But as I said, definitely as of past couple of years, we make it mandatory to have a goal on UNCG.
Great, thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Janos, for these inputs. I think it really is a critical issue to put on our radar screen for the future. Maria, did you want to jump in?
Yes, just a quick thing. Of course, my experience is as a communications specialist, so it was sort of like it could. I mean, it was easier for me to have it in my performance evaluation. But in my case, for instance, I discussed it with my representative at the beginning of the year. I knew this was going to take a lot of time of my side, or at least like enough time to have it to capture it in my performance, in my pathway performance evaluation. So, I mean, I think the communication colleagues have. I mean, it's easier for them to actually include it because eventually you will be doing it. So yeah, I think it's a very, very, very good point. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me just ask Gina, do you have another question, or should I look at it? Okay, great.
So the next question is from Elida in UNFPA Albania. She says, I see communications as very much linked with the advocacy and program work we do in country. And as such, we have integrated our advocacy and communication strategies and interventions into the program outputs. And the question is there any official instruction / guidelines we can put forward to the UN country team showing that this would be best practice to integrate the joint UN advocacy and communications work as part of the UNDAF outputs rather than keep it separately as a UN communications work plan? This would help us be seen as a communications group that is more relevant to managers and contributors to key issues that we advocate for. So just to put the question on the table, two parts actually. Two questions here with two parts. One is the role of advocacy and communications, and one is connection to the UNDAF and programming.
Right. Yeah, I mean, let me just jump in and then also offer the opportunity to others to field this one. I think what you're hitting on is really a critical issue for communications and for programming, how to integrate the two better and ensure that communications is reflected in programmatic results. I just want to flag one thing, which is being a focus of the Communications and Advocacy Working Group, which is better integration of communications into UNDAF processes, which are part of the new to be issued UNDAF guidance. And the idea there is to ensure that communications is reflected in major milestones in the UNDAF process to ensure that communications is properly reflected. So I think, let me pass the floor to Madeline, who might want to further elaborate on that. Madeline?
Yes. I think also as part of this, and I absolutely agree with Peter that it's about ensuring that communication is reflected, but it also answers one of those other challenges, and that's the challenge of financial resources. I think once you have communication reflected in the UNDAF, you're able to basically promote the area of communication and advocacy to the extent that we can get a certain portion of budget available for our own strategy. So I think it's sort of interlinked to resources. It's not just a standalone where we're explaining these are the milestones and we're going to support the programming in this way. I think it's also the programming supporting the valuable contribution of communication and advocacy.
Thank you, Madeline. And also, just for those who might benefit from this, a little explanation on the working group itself. It's a UNDG Working Group on Communications and Advocacy, which was established earlier this year. And the goal of the working group is to provide field-focused support on issues that are, important across the spectrum of communications and advocacy. So this is a new group. We're just recently been established, but we have already had a few webinars earlier this year focusing on the SDG rollout, which were also sponsored under the auspices of this working group. So it brings together about 18 UNDG agencies to work together on these issues and to provide support to UN country teams. Let me just ask, does anyone else want to take more of this question?
If I may jump in, this is Janusz from the EPI, just to say that I think in the course of this year, when we had other discussions with resident coordinators, it was accentuated by them that, in fact, those who are very successful with communications have always regarded the communications work that they do as part and parcel of the substantive work that they do. This has been stressed by Gary from Iran and some of the others. So I think that needs to be kept in mind. So in that sense, of course, if it's part of the UNDAF, then it sort of underscores that. Now, the challenge might be on a country team level and on a UN communication group level is that you might actually have joint communication activity needs projects that might fall beyond UNDAF or outside of UNDAF. But I think that can also be tackled through this mechanism. So I think the more integrated, the more you underscore the substantive nature. And I fully agree with Madeline that it certainly helps to strengthen the argumentation for resources.
Thank you, Janusz. Thank you, Madeline. Gina, do you want to add anything on this point, or shall we move?
No, I just have more questions if you.
Yeah. Maria Wissam, if you're agreed, we will move to the next question unless you would like to add something on this point.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay, yes, it's okay.
Okay, so we have some, this is just a comment from Odette in Guatemala. This is a question. If you have a question, Odette, just write it in the chat box and I'll add it as we're talking. But just to read it out here, she says, in the UN Communications Group in Guatemala, we have been working a lot now to have a strategy and policy of communications, but have asked to the UN country team about priorities. The priorities have to come from them, and we build key messages, being advisors, but they have to establish the priorities. And Odette also says, I'm happy to share with you for the first time in history, we met last week with the UN country team as a UN communications group. So really a good experience to share on the importance of linking the UN communications group to the UN country team and in a way managing upwards or asking them the right questions to get the priorities set at a high level. So I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that.
Maria, do you want to add something based on your experience in Afghanistan and Suriname, the issue of prioritization and communications taking you from? Yes.
Yeah. No, I just wanted, well, congratulations on the meeting, and I think in that sense it's really important, as it's stated in the guidelines, to have at least one of the chairs of the UNCG to be one member of the UNCT. For us, it was essential in order to keep that linkage between the UNCG and the UNCT that you have just mentioned. In case you cannot have a representative or a country director in the UNCG as chair, my experience to keep that link between both groups is that the chair of the UNCG should participate in the UNCT meetings. This will be a way of ensuring that the UNCG keeps keeps reporting on a periodic basis to the UNCT. In terms of basically setting the priorities, that I think that, I mean, it's of course essential that the UNCT sets the priorities of the UNCG, because eventually it's the structure that oversees the UNCG. But my proposal will be, and I don't know if it will work in Guatemala, but my proposal will be to maybe for the UNCG to have more of like a proactive approach. Maybe like maybe looking again at the UNDAF, and if you have a work plan of the UNDAF, identify what are the issues that the UN as a whole is going to work in 2016, let's say, and come up with a short work plan. You know, again, don't make it too complex, because we tend to complicate ourselves. But if you look at the work plan of the UN as a whole, and come up with specific ways that you can communicate together within that framework, I think that could support the UNCT also to give you some advice on what the priorities would be for the next year, or what you should be focusing on. Just some comments on using my experience.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maria. That was very on the mark. Let me. Yes, Wissam.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, to say to our Guatemalan colleague that it is exactly how things are supposed to work, you know. Normally, the UNCG proposes to the UNCT country team like a draft strategy. And it is the role of the UNCT to then make it, I mean, fine-tune it if you want. So it is exactly what Maria said. The UNCG proposes in a proactive manner, keeping in mind that the communication strategy first goal is to align the UNDAF, communication on the UNDAF. So, and that's the way that the UNCT then fine-tunes these objectives or this communication strategy. And also I would put some focus on having the UNCG chaired by UNCT members. It is a way of having two-way communications. The UNCG chair will give a feedback to the UNCT about the work of the UNCG, but also he will deliver messages from the UNCT to his group. So I think that the way our Guatemalan colleague presented it is exactly the way it should be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Wissam. Let me just hand the floor back to Gina for our next question.
Okay, so this is a question from Buwan in Mongolia. Buwan is asking, how do you communicate to government stakeholders, especially in developing countries where resources are scarce, that for the achievement of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN also contributes, including finances. So this is a question around, you know, how do you communicate the role of the UN in advancing the Agenda 2030?
Let me see. Yeah, I mean, I think, let me just start off and then maybe pass the floor to Maria or Wissam. I think, obviously, you know, communicating the 2030 agenda, being a very integrated, multifaceted agenda, requires, you know, a really strong cross-cutting communications. And I think that, you know, with the new agenda, communications will be, and advocacy will be absolutely critical. Does anyone want to take that question for Janos? Yes?
Well, I think this is Janos from DPI. I think what you will find is that there will be a number of materials that will be sent out to the country teams, to the UNCGs, to the UN information centers, talking from DPI's perspective, that will highlight and aid the communication aspects of the implementation of the SDGs that will be launched, of course, on the 1st of January, hopefully with the help of the Secretary General. DPI is already working on various different packages as far as public information communication materials are concerned, also working with the so-called hub, which of course now will be led by Mr. Navarro. So there are a number of sort of products and tools and assistance materials teed up. I think what we also heard within our own group here and from other colleagues is that indeed the first phase of the implementation of the SDGs will be very much about awareness raising. So the focus will be indeed on communicating the SDGs in their totality. So I think there will be a number of tools that will make this easier for colleagues in the field for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, Gina?
Maybe just to add to that, I mean, my interpretation of, especially when it comes to financial resources for the new agenda, I think the headline message, and that exactly is what Janos is speaking about, the headline message is getting governments to be aware of the fact that their representatives who sit in the permanent missions in New York and their heads of state who came in September have signed up to this agenda. So this is very much an agenda of the governments, the member states of the United Nations, more so, even more so than the Millennium Development Goals, right? Not least because the process to develop Agenda 2030 was the most, sort of inclusive process thus far to develop such an agenda. Not only was it a clearly intergovernmental process where all member states had a say, it also was a process where 1 out of every 1,000 people on the planet sent their priorities as input into what the goals should be. So the first message on resources in my book is really the government should think through their priorities, look at their national development strategies, and see where they are aligned to the new agenda. What comes first, what comes second, but definitely that this is their agenda, and the UN is there to support them, sometimes with finances, but often with advice and convening power and advocacy and other kind of soft resources.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Gina, for that. Maria Wissam, do you have any things to add on that one?
Maybe, I think Gina gave, the elements of answer for this question. This is not only the UN agenda, this is also the government agenda, and it endorsed it in September. And also, as Gina said, this was a comprehensive process, maybe in comparison with some critics on the MDGs is that it was kind of dropped from upside down to governments, but for the SDGs, this is something that was very comprehensive and that also governments endorsed it themselves. So it's, I think Gina answered perfectly the question.
Thank you for that confirmation. Other questions? Two more questions. Okay, we'll take 2 more questions.
Okay, so the first one is a quick one. Does the regional/headquarters group facilitate trainings for UN communications groups? This is from Colette. I'm not sure where Colette is. She didn't mark it in the question. So does the group facilitate training?
Well, I should say that over this past year, and as Peter has pointed out, this group, the UN Communication and Advocacy Working Group, has just been in existence since January. And I must say, I think in terms of the trainings and the peer-to-peer learning, it's actually accomplished quite a bit. In part, I think we're using very much this webinar platform to basically discuss and train and learn from our peers and how to move forward, particularly in the areas of the challenging areas as we're doing today. So I think many of our trainings, our platforms are going to be very much web-based in the future, because we found that to be extremely helpful and useful to colleagues. There was one training, I should say, that was supported by, in March, right?
Yes.
In March, a face-to-face training that was supported by the UN Staff College. It brought together, it was in Nairobi, so it brought together, although it brought together colleagues worldwide, it was very much Africa-based. And I believe that if people feel that this was really significant and important, this might be another platform and a way forward. Although obviously this is much more resource financial intensive to put together. So far we've had, I think that we've all learned that the webinar series has been very useful, and I think in the future we're looking towards one that might be able to guide us all in the area of advocacy, which has also been a chunk of our work that we haven't yet fully delved into, and which will be critically important in supporting and promoting the SDGs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peter?
Yes, Wissam?
From our experience here in the Western Central Africa office, what we did also for capacity building on communication is that we integrated a session on communication each time we had the possibility to, even if the workshop is not about communication itself. So what we did is every time there's a workshop on UNDAF rollout or on roles of RCOs or coordination workshops, we try to integrate the session. And I was very surprised to see how much experience sharing between colleagues themselves can be helpful very time. So it does not replace a face-to-face 100% communicating as one training, but it helps. What I can say is that it helps a lot.
Great, great, thank you. I think we have one more question. Gino, can you kindly read it out?
Sure. Okay, so this is from Lulia in Moldova. Julia from the IOM mission to Moldova. How else can a UN agency reach people and communicate to them if no digital media can be used? Everything revolves around digital media, but what else can we use that can be as or almost as efficient as digital media?
Well, I think that is a good question, and I think that,
I mean, look, UN radio or radio programs, that has worked. When you talk about digital media, are we referring to mobile phones? Because then, mobile phone messages also work in some cases. Direct communications, old-fashioned communications. Yeah, the challenge I think for communicators, I mean, I'm talking from DPI's point of view, is that what we always get from member states is that we're supposed to pay the same amount of attention to new media as to old media, to traditional means, to new platforms. And in a way, they're right, because if we look at it in the larger scheme of things, 193 countries, you have various different levels of development. So yes, I think there are possibilities and there are ways of communicating, and we have had successes, especially with radio. But we have also found, well, traditional print media, but we have also found cases where colleagues communicated with various different like theater plays and show and tell kind of things on a rural level. So again, it's a vast field of opportunities based on your creativity and of course the local environment.
I would just add from a perspective that we've also been speaking about in UNICEF, that actually digital should not be the be-all, end-all. It should not replace some of these other media. In fact, it should very much complement and support and leverage other forms of media. You know, there is no doubt in this world television is really critically important, and we have to continue to concentrate on that, on television and print, because it, especially with influential papers in worldwide, has a tremendous amount of influence, and this will that information all cascades down. So I don't think it's either one or the other. I would absolutely agree.
Thank you, Janos and Madeline. Let me just jump in to see whether Maria might want to add something based on her experience in Afghanistan or Suriname.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, for instance, in my experience in my last 2 years, although we had like social media channels, we didn't focus our communication activities around them, because just 8% of the population was having access to social media, was using social media. That, I mean, phone, of course, differentiating phone internet access to phone access, no? So it wasn't our main channel to communicate. So, and I think going back to what I mentioned in my presentation, I think we should explore a little bit more, and definitely I would love to hear more from our colleagues from Albania that were asking questions before. But I think we should go, we should explore more the framework that the UNDAF gives in terms of program communications. And also following what two of our colleagues said, radio is, I mean, I don't know how Moldova is, and I'm not very related to the situation there, but in Afghanistan, radio was the main channel for communications. And I mean, we had specific elements, communication elements, PCAs and PSA, sorry, and also some soap operas related to, sorry, PSA is related to UN, for instance, in the UN Day. But I think we could explore it a little bit more, maybe partnering a specific communication for development activities or program communication, depending on how you mention it or how you do it in the field. But exploring, like for instance, partnering with, in the case of, sorry, I talk about gender-based violence a lot because it's a UNFPA mandate. So, for instance, in gender-based violence, like developing soap operas, this is a very, very, very popular product in Afghanistan, and it, of course, it broadcasted through radio because it's the cheapest media, no? So instead of just like doing it by yourself, partner with other agencies, look at different messaging. You don't need to just ask for money, or you can also ask for support. So it can be a way of working together. Actually, when developing your program comms elements or program comms products, you can look or seek for advice, funding, or seek for other support to other agencies. So that will be, I think, something that we could explore a little bit more.
Thank you. No, I think these comments are very on the mark in terms of identifying the fact that the digital divide means that not everyone has access to digital technologies, and there are other things that you can do in terms of print, television. Certainly radio has also has the potential to reach other audiences. I think it's also important to identify whom you want to reach at the beginning of the process, and think about channels in which to reach those audiences. Even an event sometimes can be helpful if you bring together policymakers on a particular issue, and an event properly planned and executed can help to ensure that your messages resonate with think tank analysts, with government officials and others who might be more receptive to an opportunity to come together to discuss to discuss issues and policy options. So on that note, Gina, let me just ask whether there are any other questions.
I think Wissam wants to come in here. Just a minute.
Wissam, yes.
Yeah, a very quick one. A very quick one. I just want to say that I've been studying some communication strategies very recently, and one of them was the one of Moldova for the 2008 and 2011 period. And what I want to add here is that it was already at that period very surprising that they added non-digital channels. For example, one of the things that they were supposed to communicate about was human rights. And for that, they did a rock concert, they did a marathon also, and they did debates with opinion leaders. And so I would suggest to our colleague from Moldova to get in touch with the members of the UNCG of 2008-2011 communication strategy of Moldova, if they are still available.
Great. I think very helpful advice. Thank you, Wissam, for that. I think we're running toward the end of our webinar, and I just wanted to say a couple of comments in conclusion. First of all, to thank Maria. It was great to have you online, and we look forward to seeing you in New York very shortly. Thank you, Wissam from Dakar. Your thoughts were also extremely helpful and useful for this webinar. I'd like to thank Janos, Madeline, and Gina, of course, for their insights and comments on some of these questions. I just wanted to close by saying how we think to take this work forward. One thing is we would like to put together, based on this webinar, an FAQ for those of you who would, particularly for those people who weren't able to attend today, but also for others who might like to see these answers elaborated in a document. Secondly, this webinar has been recorded, and we will distribute the recording shortly. I also wanted to mention that we are revamping, as a part of our the work plan of the Communications and Advocacy Working Group. We are in the process of revamping our knowledge repository, which sits on the undg.org website, and we will we're in the process of making it more user-friendly, as well as refreshing the examples that we provide there to you to help you move forward your communications and advocacy at country level. So on that note, I think we are ready to close. I'd like to thank all of you who took the time to participate in this webinar from all over the globe. We have been enriched by the questions that you've asked, and we look forward to taking the questions that you've asked, incorporating them into our thinking and our support that we can provide to you going forward. So on that note, thank you very much to all of you who participated, and this webinar is the third webinar of our series. The first two focus on the SDGs. We look forward to, in the future, doing more webinars to connect with country teams to ensure that we can help move communicating as one forward, and to help you with your work. So thank you very much, and we look forward to being in touch.
Thank you.